So, welcome to our second ever live stream for CS135 tutorials. This is our last tutorial for this term. However, it seems like this is going to happen in the future as well. So, it's good that we're getting some practice out. Hopefully, we don't have any sort of technical difficulties this time. From what I see, the volume seems to be working. There's no high pitched squeaking sound anymore. So, hopefully, we won't scare away too many people. Okay, to get started, today we're going to be looking at more abstract list functions, mostly because it's one of the more difficult things we do in this course, because we say recursion is difficult, abstraction is difficult, we put recursion and abstraction together, and you get that one thing that most students struggle with by the end of the term. We're also going to be looking at generative recursion, especially how to debug it, because unlike simple recursion and accumulative recursion, which tend to follow certain rules and it makes it easier to predict how the function is going to run. Generative recursion isn't limited to that sort of stuff. It's kind of like with great power comes great responsibility. We don't know if it'll terminate. We don't exactly know what the next step will be without doing a very intensive trace. So learning to debug it is a very important aspect of coding as well. And then last but not least, we're also going to be looking at graphs. And this is probably the last concept that is going to be taught before your exam. So end on a good note. At this point, are there any questions? Sorry about that. Scrawling at the groundhog. Okay, so if not, then let's move on. As for announcements, today is the due date of assignment 9. It's today, Friday, April 3rd, and the last time to hand it in is 11:59 p.m. So if you're watching this live stream, please make sure to submit before that. If you're watching this on a rerun, most likely it's already passed. So we have a question which asks if there are any assistants for the final assessment. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. Only Leslie, the professor, gets the final say in that. So if you want to get an answer that is permanent and you can rely on, please post that question to Piazza, and whatever the instructors answer there, they have to do. So even if she says yes on Piazza and changes her mind later, she really can't because it's already on Piazza. So thanks for the questions. Are there any others? We don't have any announcements today since it is the last tutorial. Okay, if not, then let's look at the goals for this tutorial. So the goal by the end of this is to be able to understand how to use abstract list functions to solve all of our recursive questions. Otherwise, please we'll also look at finding errors in generative recursion and as well as understanding graphs. So to start off, we're going to jump into a really, really big problem. This one is dealing with abstract list functions. And we want you to essentially write a function called Cartesian product that consumes two lists, list 1 and list 2, and produces a single list of all pairs of C1 and C2, where C1 are elements in list 1 and C2 are elements in list 2. So below here, we have an example if that's exactly what we mean. So given an example list of ABC and 1, 2, 3, we want you to produce a single list of A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, and C3. So don't let the way it's displayed here fool you. It kind of looks like a 2D array or kind of like a two-dimensional matrix or something like that. It's not. It's just a single list where each of the elements in the list is a list of any. So we can see on the next page, we have the design recipe and the contract. So I'll go over them one at a time, starting with the design recipe's purpose. So for this Cartesian product, given the parameters list 1 and list 2, we want you to produce every single pair permutation of the elements in list 1 and list 2. So the contract for this would be it intakes a list of any, and then a list of any, and then produces a single list of the element list any. So I think this is also a good time to explain the difference between what is a list of versus what is just a single list when we talk about it in terms of our contracts. So a list of is really just a list of elements, but of arbitrary length. So when I say list of any, this list can be empty. This list can have a million elements in it. It it varies. We don't set a specific length. However, if we use specifically just list, then we're setting a final length. So in this case, if we say list any, then we're talking about exactly a single list of 2 items, and there's no variation in that. Sorry, just reading the comments. Seems like Leslie has a reply, but I I, I don't actually know who that's from. So please post it to Piazza if you have any questions. Okay, so moving on, once again, we have a smaller example here, given just a smaller list, AB, 1, 2. We want you to be able to produce all of the permutations where you have A1, A2, B1, B2. All permutations, but elements in list 1 has to be the first element, and elements in list 2 has to be the second. So I'm going to give you guys maybe just a minute or two, depending on how long I can sit here in silence, just to try it out. And then we're going to take up the answer together. So this is a very, very long question. I would say taking up the solutions to this question is probably half of this tutorial, but that's also because I go into extreme detail explaining how abstract list functions work, reminding you about how lambdas work, and everything like that. So if you're struggling with this question now, don't worry about it. We will take it up, and it is definitely the most difficult question we're going to see in this tutorial. That being said, please also do this question without any explicit recursion. We're here to practice abstract list functions. All right, so update from earlier. The person in the comments claiming to be your ISA Roger says that Leslie says that private clarifications are permitted, but we will not respond to questions about bugs, errors, advice, etc. And I'm assuming this is in relation to the question, are there any assistances for the final assessment? Okay, so if you're not done the question, please go ahead and pause this video now. And I do believe you can pause live streams and catch up later. So if you wish, please do that as well. But I am going to move on just because sitting here staring at a blank wall is a lot less interesting than staring at a bunch of students, I guess, trying to solve the problem. So I'm just going to move on and present the solution now. If you are watching this as a rerun at a later date, please pause here, finish the question, and then look at the solution afterward. Okay, so I'm actually going to go into a lot of detail for this. If you're one of the people who don't need to take it super slow, step by step, this may seem kind of long and tedious to you. This is kind of what I relate to in high school, where teachers would make you, let's say, show your steps and how you add 9 to 5, where you have to carry the 1 and show every single step and explain what you're doing. Where if you could do it in your head, you have no idea why you need to show these steps. What I will say is this is a very difficult concept, abstract list functions. If you can do this right away in your head, you're at a very, very good place, but you're probably the exception, not the rule. So, once again, if this is easy to you, by all means, please don't worry about this long explanation I'm about to go into. But what I will do is explain every single component of it. So, if there's even one part of it you don't really understand, you can pick and choose what to take away from the solution. But I don't expect people to really use everything I'm about to say to solve every single question, especially not on your exam. All right. So to start off, let's look at the inputs we were given. We know that we're given 2 lists, list 1 and list 2. Just for an example, so we have something concrete to look at, I'm going to use the exact example we gave in the problem, where we have list 1 as a list of A, B, C, and list 2 as a list of 1, 2, 3. just note that this isn't always going to be the case because we do accept lists of any's. So the goal, given these inputs, is to finalize a list of A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, and C3. So this should be a single list by the end of it. So we want to be able to create every single permutation with our given lists. So looking at this might be kind of daunting. It's a very big question, and it might not be exactly clear how we're going to start this. So what I like to do is break the question into smaller pieces, solve each of the lines one at a time, and then eventually join all of my smaller solutions into my final. So let's start off by just looking at the first line, where we're just given A1, A2, and A3. So to do this, you'll notice that you don't actually need the entire first list, right? All you're really working with is the first character and the rest of, the whole second list. All we're doing is somehow adding the first character of our first list, A, to every single character of our second list, list 2. So to do this, there's an abstract list function which comes to mind, which is map, because map is the one where we did last time, where we are giving it a function, giving it a list, and what map does is applies the given function to every single element in the list. And once again, map, when you give it a list, it will always give you a list of the same length back. And that's what we want here. We don't want the list to get any shorter. So this is probably the abstract list function that comes to mind for me to try to solve this problem. So before moving on, I'm going to give a quick review of what map was. So last time we looked at map, this was the contract that it was given. So we know that map intakes a function where the function intakes the elements of the given list one at a time, and then somehow transforms it to something else, which is then all added up together and produced as a final list in the end. So a concrete example of this would be, let's say we're giving map the function add1, and the list we're working on is just 0, 1, 2. So add1 satisfies our function requirements here. It intakes the values of our given list one at a time and then transforms it somehow. So what happens here is we're going to apply add1 to the first element of our list, 0, and get the value back 1. We're going to apply it to the second element in our list and get the value back 2. And then we're going to apply it to the last element in our list and then get the value back. So this is how we generate our final result over here. One at a time, we apply map to each of our elements, and this is our final result. So this does seem pretty similar to what we want to do, except for the fact that we can't just use add1. We need some sort of magical function which can take a character A, take the values of list 2, one at a time, and then add them together to be a list. So I guess my question to you guys now is, what do you suggest we use? Is there a function that Racket already has, or is this something where we're going to have to write one of our own? Okay, so this really isn't a function that exists in Racket, which means we're actually going to have to write something for ourselves. What I'm actually going to do is just name this function my map. It's going to have a name, which is a named function, my map. And the only reason I'm doing this is just so we can write this on the side and then maybe take the components of it afterwards to fit into our bigger solution. So good try, Roger. The list is not what we're going with in this case. I can see how you came up with that because the idea is you're given a single natural number and you're expected to produce a list out of it by the end. So definitely that does seem feasible if we're just thinking about abstract list functions. However, in this case, we're going to go with a solution. So good try. All right, so back to the solution on the board, which is I'm going to go ahead and define a function called my map. It's basically going to be like map, where it's going to, but it's going to take a special character, which is the first character of my list 1. So what I'm going to do is use map, but the function I'm going to give that is a lambda. And in this lambda, what I'm going to do is take the elements of my list that I gave to map as normal and use lambda to join this together with the character I received earlier. In the example over here, it would be the character A, and then produce a list of C1 and C2 out of it, where C1 is an element in list 1 and C2 are the elements in list 2. So over here, I used lambda, and if you remember from last tutorial, lambda is nothing too scary. It's really just a nameless function. So this is something we worked on. If you are confused, please go back to last week's tutorial. I know the sound quality, I think, when I explain lambda is not great. I will try to find some time to re-record the front, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you guys. But for now, hopefully even the visual of it would help. And the idea here is what lambda is going to do is it says it takes one parameter, which is what we need because the function we give the map has to take exactly one parameter, and it's going to be the elements of the list we give it one at a time. And all it's going to do is create a list with the given element and the given character from earlier in my function. So let's quickly do a step through this just to see exactly how it works. I'm going to call my function myMap, giving it the character A and the list 1, 2, 3. Since all of my parameters are already in its simplest form, I can substitute it all in one step into my body. So you can see every occurrence of C1 was replaced with the character A, and every occurrence of list 2 was replaced with the list 1, 2, 3. Now, this looks exactly like the map example we did up here, where C2 is going to take on the values of 1, 2, 3, one at a time, and then the function body over here will produce to us our final results. So to start off, we're going to pass 1 into the C2 parameter, and the function body is then going to produce to us A1, or list A1. Then we're going to pass in 2, and then get the result back A2. Then we're going to pass in 3, and then finally get the result back A3. And since that's the last element in our list, we can get our final answer as needed. So this is just one small part of the bigger question we're trying to solve, but you can kind of already see if we really, just for this exact example, brute force call my map 3 times and give it the characters A, B, C, and then take their results and somehow append them together, then that's really our goal, right? That's the final answer we want to have. So obviously we're not going to do that. This is just minor steps in our solution, but it's good to have thoughts like this because then you start to piece together what you need to do to get your final solution. At this point, are there any questions with this? Okay, if not, then I am going to move on. So over here on the screen, I just have my map, which is the function we wrote earlier. And now we're going to try to somehow fit it into our final solution. So we know we can find our solution one line at a time, which means all we really have to do is take the elements in list 1 and then feed them one at a time to my map. Does anyone have any suggestions on how to do this? And once again, I'm looking at you, Roger, because I know you're at least one of the viewers. No suggestions? Okay. Well, what I'm actually going to do here is use a simple recursive solution. And I know earlier I said no explicit recursion, but that's for the final solution that we're going to hand in. It's completely fine to use some explicit recursion as you're working throughout the process if you find that it works easier for you. So in this case, that's exactly what I'm going to do because iterating through a list one at a time is something we've done so many times using simple recursion that I think it would be very helpful here. So to start off on the screen, you're going to see the template for simple recursion, where the dot dot dots are elements that we need to fill in. So let's start with the most simple base case. Oh, and the list that we're iterating on is list 1. List 2 in this case is the carry along variable that we're not going to change. So let's start with the base case. As always, if you're given an empty list, what do you want to produce? So the answer to that is empty. If you're given an empty list, that's all you want to produce. Once you hit the base case, empty is your answer. So I always like to fill in at least what I know first. Then let's move on to the recursive case. So in the recursive case, I always say something like you want to do something with the first and then simply recurse on the rest. You don't have to worry about the rest. You're just going to recurse on it. And then you're just going to have to find a way to join the answers of the first and the rest together. So let's start with doing something with the first. What is the first element of list 1 that we're dealing with? Well, really, it's just the character A. And earlier, that's what we said we wanted to give to the function we wrote called myMap, right? So let's actually do that. So whenever we're given the first of list 1, what we really want to do is take this element, give it to myMap, and then get one of the rows of our goal back. So over here, that's what I'm going to do. And to do that, I'm actually going to rewrite the function myMap using lambda. So I'm going to change the function myMap from a named function to this lambda version, which is a nameless function. So I thought this was a great opportunity to once again show you how the translations could work. So as you can see, there's really no big changes. The body and everything is very much the same. The only difference is before where I would say define my map and then give it its parameters, now all I have to say is lambda and then give it its parameters. Everything else about the body stays the exact same. So please, once again, remember, lambdas are not that scary. They're just nameless functions. You're very used to writing functions by now. All you have to do is to be able to translate them into a lambda form. So given this is what I want to do with my first. When I'm given my first, all I want to do is pass it to my lambda, which is C1. And then with this, I can create my list as if it was before. So the one difference here to notice, am I missing the first of my list? Yes, I am. So I noticed that too, and I was hoping to just edit it in afterwards. So thank you, Roger, you caught me. I actually forgot to write the words first of my list over here, so I'm not actually passing the lambda anything. Um, I will edit that and it will be in the final copy. Thank you. So what I was going to say was the other difference, other than just getting to put in the first of the list, is the fact that you can see the number of parameters we had from my map to the lambda version has changed. Before we had 2 elements and now we only have 1. And the reason for that is back when we were writing my map, we had to explicitly give it list 2 because it didn't exist anywhere else yet. However, in our current version, we already have list 2 available to us from our larger solution. So that's the reason why we don't have to explicitly give it to lambda over here. That being said, if you did, it wouldn't be a mistake either. Whatever works best for you. But this is the reason why there is a difference. Other than that, there is no difference at all. Okay, so moving on. Then last thing to see is how are we going to be able to join our solutions together? We have the results of our first. We have what we assume to just be the correct results from our recursive case. Now we need a function to join the two of them together. And sometimes it can be very hard to decide what this function should be. So what I usually like to do in these cases is to look at the contract, because if I know what types I'm dealing with, then I can more easily come up with what function I need to join the two of them together to produce the result that I want. So looking at the contract for Cartesian product, we know that it takes a list of any, and then produces a single list of list any. That means that in our recursive case, where we call Cartesian product, this function over here should produce to us a list of list any's. And then if we look at the lambda we wrote, so the lambda version of my map, we know that it really produces this goal one at a time. So it also produces to us a list of list any. So given that the first has a type of list list of list any, the the results of the recursion also has a type of list of list any. What function can we use to put the two of them together so that we can also produce a list of list any? Any takers? So in the comments, Rogers notes that the contract should be a list of X and a list of Y, which then produces a list of lists X, Y. I don't think that's necessarily true, just because we don't necessarily need list one to only have characters in it, or list two to have only numbers in it. We can just have any mixture of any types in the list, and we'll still be able to produce this result. So don't worry, we're okay on that. That wasn't a mistake. All right. Well, if there aren't any answers for the question of what we can use to join them, I'll just tell you, and the answer to that is append. So append is that function we keep telling you you're not allowed to use on midterms, but that was back when you were just a beginner student and we didn't want you to be able to shoot yourself in the foot with it. But now that you guys are, was it intermediate students with Lambda or just advanced students, this is a function that is readily available to you. So what append is going to do is it's going to take your first list and join it with your second list by taking each element of the second list and appending it one at a time to the back of your first list. So this means if I were to use cons and have the list ABC 1, 2, 3, then I would end up with the list A, B, C, but my fourth element would just be list 1. On the other hand, if I use append, with list 1 being ABC, list 2 being 1, 2, 3, then I can end up with the result list A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, opened up to form a single list, which is exactly what we want here. So just by knowing our types, we were able to determine that the function we needed to join these two results together was actually append. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, if there aren't any questions, then I'm going to move on from here. Now that we have our final recursive solution, the next step becomes how do we write this using abstract list functions? Because earlier, as I said, we don't want any sort of explicit recursion in the solution. Sorry, you can see my dog. He's still checking out the groundhog. Okay, so to do this as an abstract list function, last time we talked about how we can abstract simple recursion using fold R, and we can abstract accumulative recursion using fold L. So that means anything we can write in simple recursion, we can write using fold R, and anything we can write in accumulative recursion, we can write using fold L. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. I am just going to take the solution we already have, which we know to work, and translate it into fold R. So before we do that, I'm going to give you guys a quick reminder of what fold R was. This is the exact same thing we talked about last time, so you can check out that video there or at the summary here again. So to start off, we have the contract for fold R. Fold R takes in three parameters. It takes in a function, which takes two things, and joins them together to produce Y. It takes in Y, and it takes in a list to iterate through. So in a little more sense, with a concrete example, we can say fold R can take in a function, for example, cons, empty, which is the base case, and the list to iterate through here is 0, 1, 2. So we can kind of label them as this. This is what we did last time. And the idea here is if we were to write a problem in simple recursion, let's say, which is just to go through a list and then produce the exact same list back, this is our simple recursion solution where we would have to fill in what to produce during the base case and what function to use to join the first of our list to the result of recursing on the rest of our list together. And in this case, we chose cons. So this is how fold R works. The first parameter over here is going to be the function we use to join the results of our first and the results of recursing on our rest together to produce the answer that we want. The second parameter we're going to take is just what to be produced at the base case. And lastly, the parameter is just the list we're going to iterate through. And because we use fold R, we can think of it as folding to the right. So the elements we're going to see starts from the left and folds to the right. But in simple recursion, this also means the first element to be evaluated is actually the 2. So if you think about how recursion works, we're going to be given 0. We're going to want to cons 0 to something. But before we can decide what to cons it to, we have to find the results of recursing on the rest. So we do. In this recursion, we're given 1 as the first, and we know we want to cons it to something. But before we know what to cons it to, we have to recurse on the rest, which in this case is 2. Last but not least, we have 2. We know we want to cons it to something, but before we know what we can cons it to, we have to recurse on the rest in this case, which is empty. Empty is the base case, so we produce empty. And the first thing that gets done is we cons the value 2, which was the first of our list, to the result of empty. So this is what I mean by the last element on the right, the value 2, actually is the first element to be kind of evaluated and transformed into its final form. And then once again, you go backwards, you have the results, which is cons 2 empty, you cons the 1 in front of that, then you go backwards one more time, you have the result, cons 1, cons 2 empty, and then you cons the value 0 on top of that to produce your final result of 0, 1, 2. Are there any questions at this point? This is just a quick reminder of how recursion works. I know it's probably far past what you guys need to review, but it's really important to understand that this is the reason how the inner workings of fold R works, because the next thing we're going to do is write our own function to pass to fold R. So up until now, we've really only used built-in racket functions like cons or append to feed to our fold R, but we never really written one for ourselves. So what if instead of producing 0, 1, 2, I wanted to produce the list 1, 2, 3? What function can I pass to fold R to do this? So I'll give you guys a second or two to think about it. If you have a solution, please let me know in the comments. You can tell I'm not really set up for streaming. Every time I take a sip of my coffee, somehow my background darkens. It's kind of cool. Okay, if there aren't any solutions, then I will provide one, which is the idea that we have to write our own. So what I'm going to do, actually, I can see definitely where the idea of map comes from, where you take a list and then you map add 1 to each of the elements. However, over here, what I want to do is not have a fold R result and then map around it, but pick a different function to give to fold R directly so that it can just accomplish what it needs to. Definitely, if you were asked this question on an exam, map after you get the results from fold R would work 100%. Here, I guess I didn't explain what I needed properly. I apologize for that. I'm actually going to give you the solutions to what I can provide to fold R directly to achieve the results I want. But map is a really good answer. Thank you for that. So what I'm actually going to do here is write my own function lambda. And as we see from the fold R contract, lambda needs to take 2 parameters. First is going to be of type x, which is going to be of the same type as the elements in the list, or in the list. This is actually going to be the elements of the list one at a time. And then the second one is going to be of type Y. And this is the exact same type that's going to be produced at the end. And it's also the exact same type that's being produced by the base case. So we know in this case, type Y is a list. So because we've always been using built-in functions, there's one thing that's been abstracted away from us that we've just had kind of the ignorant bliss of ignoring, which is the fact that full_dar, the function you give it, actually takes in a result. We don't actually think about it this way very often, which is the fact that we actually have to be able to reference the results of our recursive function somehow. And that's actually done by the second parameter of the function we have to give to full_dar. So in this case, I just called it result. So result really just means whatever the recursion on the rest of my list gives me, that is what will be stored in this value. All right, so now that I have the first of my list, which is represented by X, and the result of my recursion, which is represented by result, I can proceed to make my final solution. So to do this, all I have to do is cons add 1 to the first of my list, so add 1 to X, and cons that to result, which is just the correct solution produced by recursing on the rest of our list. Any questions? All right, so at this point, this is our final solution. My lambda over here is just the function I will substitute for over here in cons. So I'm taking out cons and I'm writing my own. And my final solution would just be full_dar, where the first parameter is the function I'm going to use, lambda x result, cons add 1 x result. That's my entire function. The second parameter I'm going to intake is my base case, which hasn't changed, just like before, it's still empty. And then the last parameter I'm going to intake is just the list I want to recurse on. Any questions at this point? Okay, if not, then let's actually jump back to the, oh yes, and that's the final result we get. 1, 2, 3. Sorry about that. Okay, so at this point, let's finally jump back to the original problem we were trying to solve. I told you guys this one was going to be really long, and because I go into a lot of detail, you can kind of see that starting to unfold. We're almost done, I promise. Okay, so back to, since we just talked about how to translate simple recursion to full_dar, and not only that, also how to write a function to pass to full_dar by ourselves to do what we needed to do, let's actually do it for our simple recursive solution and translate it into the abstract list function solution that we needed. So to start off, we know we need full_dar, and once again, I'm just going to set it up. Cartesian product takes in 2 parameters, list 1 and list 2. We know for full_dar, the base case is going to stay the same as in our simple recursive solution, which is empty. The list that we're going to be recursing through is actually list 1. List 2 is just the ride along, as it will be over here as well. And then last but not least, what we have to do is fill in the function to give to full_dar. So the function has to be able to handle this else case over here. So let's do that now. So I'm going to write my own function, lambda, and it's going to take 2 parameters, C1, being the first element of my list that I'm giving one at a time out of list 1, and then results, which is, once again, just the results. Did I highlight it? No, that's not what I highlighted. Which is, once again, just the results of my recursive solution when I call recursion on the rest of my list. So given these 2 things, all I really have to do is just copy the body that I was already provided with over here. I highlighted here so you can see that there really isn't any difference, right? We're given everything in the exact same form. And the only next thing to note is that instead of appending my solution to the results of recursing on the rest, I append my solution to results, which also just represents the results of having recursed on the rest of my list. So direct translation from simple recursion to fold R or abstract list functions. Are there any questions at this point? I do believe this is the last slide for this question. And once again, I would like to reiterate, you absolutely do not have to go through this whole process. If you can just look at it and it just comes to you, by all means, you're at a really, really good spot for this course. But once again, you are most definitely, I'm going to say this because we got more viewers now. Thank you. You are the exception, probably, not the rule. This is a very, very difficult concept. If you can just look at it and get the solution in your mind, that is absolutely amazing. However, please don't feel bad if you need any chunks of what I just showed you here. Maybe not the entire thing, but maybe you need to write the map function alone on the side first. Maybe you just have a really bad time mapping fold R in your head and you want to write out the simple recursion first and then translate it afterwards. That is completely fine. Whatever works for you. As long as you guys understand that the inner workings of simple recursion and fold R are the exact same, just like the inner workings of accumulative recursion and fold L are the exact same. However you want to do it is up to you. Okay. So oh, what did I do? Okay, no, I just highlighted it, so that was the final answer. Don't worry, there's no more to the slide. That is the final solution. We have a much prettier typed up version over here. This will also be the one that are posted in the slide, so please refer to this one as well. However, if you want the written ones, it's just how we got to this point. Finally, we can move on to problem 2, and I promise problem 2 is actually much, much shorter than problem 1. Problem 1, like I said, definitely was probably half the tutorial at this point or more. And it's fine if I go over time because no one's going to kick me out of the classroom. Let's move on to problem 2, where we want you to write a function called increasing list that consumes a positive integer n and produces a list of n lists of natural numbers, where the ith list contains the first I plus 1 natural number. So I think a concrete example looks a little better. If you're given 1, I want you to produce to me a list of length 1, and the first element should also be a list of length 1 with the value 0. If I give you the value 4, then I want you to produce to me as my final answer a list of length 4 where the element in the first index has length 1, element in the second index has length 2, element in the third index has length 3, and element in the fourth index has length 4. And each of these lists are just counting up from 0 to the number you needed to have the right length. So I'll give you guys a minute to try this out, also because I've been talking a lot and I need some coffee. And otherwise, we'll take it out together in about, I say a minute, but probably 30 seconds, because once again, sitting here by myself looking at the wall is not very interesting. My dog's still chilling outside. He's growling at the groundhog. Okay, so to start off, does anyone have any suggestions of what abstract list function to start with? 135 ISAJ. I think that's Jimmy. The only other J is Jean, and I know that's not me. All right, build list. Absolutely. Build list is definitely the right way to go. So here I would say the way to deduce that is once again by looking at the contrast. So over here, our question gives us a single natural number to work with, right? And if you look at the abstract list functions you guys were given beforehand, build list is the only one that takes in a single natural number and then produces a list as its result, which is exactly what we want here. But definitely the abstract list function to go with is build list. And I'm just going to give a quick example of what that looked like, which is also available in the previous tutorial. So let's say I had, the build list takes 2 parameters. The first one is a natural number. This represents the length of the list you want to produce. And then the second one is a function. a function which takes in a natural number one at a time and then maps something to it. So this is kind of a two-step process. So to start off with the example, let's say I give the list the number 4. The first thing it's actually going to do for me is build me a list of length 4, starting from index 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then the second thing it's going to do is going to take the function that I provided for it, which in this case is add1, and add1 is a valid function because add1 takes in one natural number at a time and then produces something out of it. And what it's going to do is it's going to apply this function to every single element of the list I had just built. So it's going to apply itself to 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, and produce me a final list of 1, 2, 3, 4. Any questions about build lists? Okay, if not, then let's actually move on to solving our current problem. So the example I gave is quite similar to what we're actually working with. So let's look at the second example over here, where we're also given the natural number 4. So we know we're going to pass 4 to the list, and this is going to produce to us a list of length 4, values 0, 1, 2, 3. Now the only problem we have to solve is what mystery function to give it so that we can map 0 to the list of length 1 with the value 0, map the number 1 to a list of length 2 with value 0, 1, then 2 to 0, 1, 2, and the number 3 to 0, 1, 2, 3. Does anyone have any ideas of what I could give it as a function? Thank you, Jimmy. Build list again. But if I give it build list directly, that doesn't actually work. And I swear we didn't plan this out. You kind of fell exactly into the trap I was setting you guys up for. So if I give the list the value 0, it's actually going to produce to me an empty list because that's a list of length 0. So there's actually something we need to do additionally to make this work. And what that is basically somehow add the value 1 to the number we give it before it gets sent to the build list. And to do that, we're actually just going to write our own function, which is lambda. So the lambda I'm going to write here takes in one parameter, which is the one natural number at a time given to you by build list. And what it's going to do is it's going to call build list again using the natural number you gave it. But before it does so, it's going to add 1 to the value. And the function is just going to be identity. Identity just produces the exact same element that it was given. Sorry. So in this case, if I give lambda the first element 0, it's going to produce to me a list of length 1 because 0 plus 1 is 1 and index starting at 0. Just like if I give it the next value, I highlighted incorrectly, next value, value 1, it's going to add 1 to this value. So I'm going to get a length of length 2, and it's going to have the values 0, 1. And you can do the same for 2 and 3. And the great thing is this function works for every single element in our build list, which is exactly what we needed it to. And this is in fact just our mystery function that we can now give the build list to have our solution. So this next page is just exactly what I had written there, but typed up very nicely. So over here, we kind of had written something where we kind of wrote identity on our own, where you would just take the element and then produce the element. Racket does have this as a built-in function, so you can use that instead as well. Are there any questions about the solution before we move on? So once again, please feel free to chime in the comments. The comments is not just for ISAs, despite only having mostly ISA participation in there. They are very friendly. They would love to chat with you. And you have the protected anonymity of the internet. So by all means, ask away. We have no idea who you are. If you want me to explain a process again, that's completely okay. All right. If not, then I'm going to move on. And the next question we were supposed to do is generative recursion debugging. Unfortunately, we ran into a couple technical difficulties while setting this question up. So I am going to skip this for the live component of this tutorial. And if everything works out, by the time I post this, this piece will be cut out and it will be replaced with me explaining this question. So if you want to see how this generative recursion debugging question works, please stay tuned until then. So I am instead going to jump straight ahead into graphs, which is the last unit you guys learned, and it's probably going to be the last thing on your exam as well. So to review, we're going to actually first look at adjacency list representations of graphs. So the idea is that we can represent a graph as a list of pairs where each pair consists of a node and its list of out neighbors, and this is called an adjacency list. So an example here would just be this list given over here. And what this graph actually, what this list represents is a graph with the nodes A, B, C, where A has edges to B and C, B has an edge to C, and then C just doesn't have an edge to anything. And this would be our final graph. So let's explain some of the terminology I just used. This is the exact same graph we had before. Sorry, there's vibrating. I'm using my phone as the webcam, and I think someone is spamming the Slack group. I should turn it to silent next time. All right. Sorry about that. Let's get back to terminology. So the first thing to note here is a node. So a node is essentially just a single point in our graph, and it's represented by the firsts of every single element in our list. So over here, we have 3 nodes. We have A, B, and C. Then an edge, on the other hand, is just a pair of nodes representing a directed connection. So over here, we talked about how A has an edge to B and A has an edge to C. So to represent the direction of this, we would call this edge AB, we would call this edge AC, and we would call this final edge down here BC. So, like I said earlier, there's also something called direction, which is the idea that the order which the nodes appear in the edge does matter. So I can go from A to B, but not the other way around. And that's represented by the pointy arrows on my edges. Then we also have something called an in-neighbor, which essentially just says A is an in-neighbor of both B and C. That's an example. And the idea is it's an in-neighbor if I can go from A to B. So if I can go into B using A, then A is an in-neighbor of B. So over here, I gave an example. I can get from node A to node B. I can get from node A to node C, but I cannot get from node C back to node A. So therefore, C is not an in-neighbor of A. Then our last definition that we have is out neighbor. This is just the opposite of whatever the in-neighbor was. So if A is an in-neighbor of B, then B is an out neighbor of A. And there's really no other way I could have drawn this. So are there any questions about these definitions? If not, then let's move on. We have a couple more terminologies, but to explain these, I'm actually going to use a more complex graph, which can be found right over here. So let's start by drawing this out. Once again, the first of every single element in my adjacency list is going to be my nodes. So over here, I have nodes A, B, C, D, and E. Then every single element that comes as a second are what the current node has an edge to. So for example, node A has an edge going to C as well as going to E. Node B doesn't have any outgoing edges. Node C has one outgoing edge to B. Node D has an outgoing edge to A, B, and E. And then last but not least, node E has an outgoing edge back to D as well. So this is just a more complex graph. It's actually going to be the graph we use in our next question. So I thought, why not introduce it now? But now let's look at the terminologies. The first one we have is a path. So a path is essentially a sequence of nodes used to traverse a graph. So the idea is, let's say I want to be able to go from node A over here to node B, then the path I have to take is A, C, B. Well, there's many paths I can take. This is just one of them. So we have a question in the comments that says, does the order matter for graphs? What do you mean by order? So does the order in which it comes in the adjacency list matter? Or does the order, for example, when we talk about an edge going from AB versus BA matter? The list. Okay. So the answer to that is no. The order of the that the nodes appear in the list absolutely does not matter. So if I had a list over here that said C and then empty with B, C, and then A, B, C, that will produce to me the exact same graph. So I can reverse it, I can shuffle it. It's completely okay. As long as I still have an adjacency list where the first element of my elements is the node, and what follows it is a list of all of the nodes it has an edge to. That's a really good question because most of the time we work with lists and order does matter. This is one of the times where it doesn't. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, then I'm going to move on. If you come up with any, please feel free to add them in the comments. I'll try to make sure I catch them, which isn't hard because the comments aren't really moving. So we talked about a path. The next thing we have to talk about is a cycle. So a cycle is a closed path that starts and ends both from the same node. So meaning you can go in a circle and end up right back from where you started. So an example of this in this graph is the nodes A, D, and E form a cycle. If I start from A, I can go to E, I can go to D, and then back to A, and that would form a cycle. So there's many other cycles in here too. This is just one example of it. And then last but not least, we have something called a DAG, which is directed acyclic graph. So this just means a graph where there are no cycles. And this is very special. You'll probably use this more in CS. What's algorithms again? 341. So definitely later on, maybe in CS240 as well. This is a very interesting concept. 341. Thank you. But for now, you just have to understand that there are these special graphs called directed acyclic graphs, and what's special about them is that there are no cycles. Okay. Any questions about any of these terminologies? If not, then let's move on to our final question, which is a problem we want you to do called count in neighbors. Whoever's taking CS 341 next term, this is a good review for you. That must be Roger because I don't think anyone goes from CS 135 to CS 341. Okay, so for this problem, we want you to write a function called count in neighbors that consumes a node, a graph, and produces the number of in neighbors of the particular node we gave you. So we assume that the input node does in fact exist in the graph, and we want you to write two solutions, one doing whatever you want, so probably explicit recursion, and then the second one using no explicit recursion, so abstract list functions. This is the example of, so this is really the design recipe or an example, I guess. This is an example. Let's go through it very quickly. This is the same graph we were looking at before. And from this, we can see that A has exactly one in neighbor, meaning there is only one node we can use to get into node A. And in this case, it's node B. E, on the other hand, has two in neighbors, meaning there are two nodes we can use to get into node E. And in this case, we can go from node A to E, and we can also go from node D to E. So the question here is we want to be able to give you a node and for you to tell us how many in neighbors it has. So I'm going to once again give you maybe just half a minute to try this out on your own, and then we'll take up the solutions together. So just checking, my dog's chilling outside. Ow. Okay, let's take up the solution now. To start off, let's do the explicit recursion solution. That's the one most of us are familiar with, and it also seems more logical and easier to explain. So to start off, all we really have to do, if we look at it visually, to find out how many in neighbors a certain node has, is to iterate through our entire adjacency list one at a time, and then each time checking the seconds of our list, which is the list of nodes that can be reached by the current node. And then all we have to do is count whether or not the node we're looking for is a member of this list. So for example, let's try to search for node A. Node A is not a member of this second over here. It's not a member of list CE. So still 0. It's not a member of empty, 0. It's not a member of this list just B, 0. It is, however, a member of this list ABE, so +1. And then last but not least, it's not a member of this last list over here of just D. So our final answer is there is one in neighbor of A. We can do the same thing for E. There's an in neighbor in from node A, not in the second one, not in the third one. There's another one from node D, so that makes 2. And then not in the last one either. So that means E has 2 in neighbors. This is the process I want to do. And in simple recursion, I can do that quite easily. Starting off with my base case, if I give you an empty graph, so if there are no nodes, then how many neighbors does a certain node have? In this case, 0, so we can fill in our base case. Then the next thing to ask is whether or not the current node we're looking for is a member of the second of the current node we're looking at. And the second represents a list of nodes that the current node can reach, right? So in this case, if it is a member, let's add 1 to our solution, as we do over here, and then recurse on the rest and just add this to the solution of the rest. Otherwise, whatever count we get from counting in the rest of our graph is just our final solution. Any questions about this solution? Okay, if not, then let's look at how we can turn this into an abstract list function solution. So without explicit recursion. Once again, simple recursion maps directly to fold R. So that's the abstract list function I'm going to be using. Let's label each of the sections that we need. We know the first one of the things we need to fill in for fold R is the base case. And over here, we can see in the base case, we just need the value 0. One of the other things we need to know is what list are we actually recursing through. And over here, we know that the list we recurse through is actually just the graph. And then last but not least, we also need a function to handle our recursive case. And in this case, that's just this entire function over here. And we can write this as a lambda. And we also have to remember to refer to the results that we get from recursing on our rest as just results. So the solution looks like this. 0 being our base case from earlier, graph being the graph we're recursing through. Every occurrence of recursion, explicit recursion, where we recurse on the rest, is replaced by our value result, which represents the result we get from the recursion on the rest. And then everything else about this stays the same, except, I guess, whenever we used to reference the first book graph. Instead, we just now use the variable we assign to it because foldr will pass us the values of the list one at a time. So this is how we would translate it into our abstract list function solution. Any questions about this question at all? Any questions about graphs in general? Okay, if not, then there's just one extra practice problem we can get you guys to try. And that question is to determine whether or not a graph is acyclic, meaning it doesn't have a cycle at all. So I'm not going to show you the solution to this. I want you guys to try it on your own. If you feel like you have a solution or you're really stuck or you just kind of want to know what it is, please come attend our online office hours with Roger. I'm sure the times for that are posted on Piazza. Otherwise, if you have any questions about anything from this tutorial, please post it on Piazza. We are constantly monitoring it. Even if you're watching this video at a later time, we're going to do our best to answer it, especially with the exam coming up. I'm sure this will be played much more frequently at a much later time. Other than that, that is the end of this tutorial. Are there any final questions, comments, concerns? Can you explain how you trans the recursive to abstract function? Yes, absolutely. So the question is whether or not I can go over how, once again, I translated our simple recursive result to the abstract list function one more time. And absolutely, I can do that. So once again, when we talk about folder, we know we have to give it three things as parameters. One of them is the base case. And in this case, I labeled the base case, which is already presented in our simple recursion, as just 0. The second thing we need to also know is what list we're actually going to be recursing on. And in this case, the list to recurse through is called graph. And that's because our graph is represented as an adjacency list, which is just a list of pairs of node and all of a list of nodes it can reach. So this is actually the list we're being recursing through, and the folder is going to give us one of these sets at a time. Then last but not least, the hardest part we have to deal with is what function to pass to folder so that we can join together the results of taking the first of element in our list to the results obtained by recursing explicitly on the rest of our list. So we need a way to join these together. And in this case, we have to write our own lambda to do so. And to do that, basically, we just have to copy this entire box because this is in fact what we do in our recursive case. And the thing to note is when we write our own function explicitly, it's a function that takes in two parameters, one being the first element of the list we're dealing with, and the second one we normally name result, which is just the result of having recursed on the rest of our list. So in this case, what I highlighted is essentially the explicit recursion on the rest of our list. This is usually just represented by the value result afterwards. The first of the graph over here is just going to be represented by whatever we name the parameter we give to lambda, because folder is going to give us the first of the graph one at a time anyways. And then taking this, we can directly translate it into our abstract list function. Maybe if I can open this screen and screen, that would be good. Oh, no, wait, this isn't a share screen. This is a share screen. Give me a second. I think this could work. All right, perfect. Perfect. Got a little bit smaller, but that's okay. So you can see this was our abstract list functions solution. And you can see how it maps over directly. Oh, the screen is a bit shifted. There we go. So over here, we can see that 0 is the base case, and it gets passed as the base case, which we identified in our simple recursion solution. Graph is the graph list we're going to recurse through, which we also identified here in our simple recursion solution. Then last but not least, this whole thing over here with lambda, that is the function we're using to join together the results of our first and the results of recursing on our rest. And that translates to this box in red over here, where you can see the explicit recursion on the rest is replaced with the value results. Add one, else, everything maps over. And then last but not least, instead of having to call the first of the graph, over here we just call it adjacency list because that's what we named the first parameter of our lambda for folder, which is just what lambda throws at us from the list we're recursing through one at a time. So that's how we did the translation. Really good question. Any other questions before we leave? Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, thanks so much for sticking through the entire tutorial if you are still here. So does it mean that the second parameter of the lambda is the result of the rest of the list? Yes, so that's a really good question. So the question is, does it mean the second parameter of the lambda, and I'm assuming you mean this over here, the result parameter, is the result of the rest of your list? It's the result of having recursed on the rest of your list, and that's exactly what it is. So that's really good. Really good questions. Anything else I can help clarify? Okay, if not, then once again, thank you so much for participating. Thanks for sticking through the entire tutorial. I will post this online so that you guys can reference back to it at a later date, especially when you actually do start studying for the exam, which I know most people haven't yet. If you have any questions then, please post it on Piazza. You can even link the exact time you have a question for. So have a great weekend.